A black single dad thought he was simply helping a drunk, frightened woman get safely home. 2 days later, his boss showed him security footage and asked, "Where did you find her?" But the question that followed made Elias realize this was never about one bad night. The stranger was his boss's sister, and what she had been trying to reveal could put 24 lives at risk. Monday morning, rain streaked the narrow windows of Harbor Bridge Recovery Center, turning the Tacoma sky the color of wet concrete. Elias Carter arrived at 7:06 with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and his maintenance keys clipped to his belt. He had barely stepped into the maintenance room when he noticed Dr. Raymond Pierce standing beside the workbench. That alone was unusual. The director rarely came downstairs unless something had broken badly enough to threaten the day's schedule. But there was no alarm sounding, no burst pipe, no frantic nurse waiting in the hallway. Just Raymond. His coat was still damp from the rain. His jaw looked tight. "Morning," Elias said carefully. "Something wrong?" Raymond didn't answer. Instead, he unlocked his phone, tapped the screen twice, and placed it on the workbench between them. "Look." The image was grainy, washed in the gray-green tint of a security camera. A timestamp in the corner read, Saturday, 9:17 p.m. Elias recognized himself immediately. He was standing beneath a porch light outside a house in Tacoma's North End, one arm extended as a woman struggled up the front steps. Her face was partly hidden by her hair, but Elias remembered the unsteady walk, the trembling hands, the way she kept looking over her shoulder. Raymond stared at the screen, then at Elias. "Where did you find her?" There was something in his voice that made Elias set down his coffee. "Near the light rail station." "Was she alone?" "Yes." Raymond enlarged the image with 2 fingers. The woman's face became clearer. Elias felt a small shift in his stomach. "You know her?" Raymond's eyes stayed on the phone. "She's my sister." For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the old ventilation fan rattling above them. Elias looked at the photograph again. Natalie. She had given him only her first name Saturday night. She had never mentioned Harbor Bridge, never mentioned Raymond Pierce. And she had been very clear about one thing. "Don't call my brother." Elias slowly lifted his eyes. "I didn't know. I believe you." Raymond answered too quickly. He picked up the phone, but instead of putting it away, he opened another image from the same camera. Natalie was near the door now, one hand gripping the porch railing while Elias stood several feet back. Raymond studied it like there was something hidden inside those pixels. Did she say where she'd been? Not really. Did she say who she was with? No. Raymond finally looked directly at him. Elias had spent years maintaining buildings, boilers, wiring, pumps, locks. Most failures announced themselves long before something actually stopped working. A strange vibration, a smell that didn't belong, a sound half a second too late. People had signs too. And something about Raymond didn't fit. A worried brother should have been asking whether Natalie had fallen, whether Elias had called a doctor, whether she had gotten safely inside. Instead, Raymond asked very quietly, "Did she tell you why she was drinking?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Saturday night returned in fragments. Natalie's frightened glance toward the street, her refusal to let him call anyone. The words she had spoken before closing her front door. "If my brother asks, tell him exactly what you saw, not what he wants to hear." Raymond stepped closer. "Elias." Elias met his boss's eyes, and that was when the uneasiness finally settled into something colder. 2 nights earlier, Elias Carter had known nothing about Natalie Pierce. Saturday had begun the way most Saturdays did in the small South Tacoma duplex he shared with his 8-year-old son, Micah. Laundry turning in the dryer, cartoons murmuring from the living room, and a stack of bills Elias kept moving from one side of the kitchen counter to the other. At 38, Elias had become good at making worry look ordinary. He managed facilities at Harbor Bridge during the week and picked up small repair jobs whenever he could. A leaking faucet here. A broken garbage disposal there. Enough extra work to keep groceries in the refrigerator and Micah's school account paid. Usually. Dad? Elias quickly folded an overdue utility notice beneath another envelope. Micah stood in the doorway holding a faded blue kitchen timer. You forgot. Elias glanced at the microwave clock. 8:12. Despite himself, he smiled. I didn't forget. You were about to. That's different. Micah climbed onto a chair and placed the timer between them. It had belonged to Danielle, Elias's wife. Before illness had reduced their life to appointments, medications, and quiet hospital hallways, she had started a family rule. 10 minutes every night. No bills, no work, no school problems. Just them. After Danielle died, Elias kept the ritual because some promises were easier to carry when they had a sound. Tick, tick, tick. That evening, however, Elias had one last repair call across town. I'll be home before 9, he promised. Then we do our 10. Micah narrowed his eyes. Full 10? Full 10. A neighbor agreed to stay with Micah, and Elias headed out. By 8:40, the repair was finished. Rain had begun falling when he passed a light rail station on his way home, thin silver lines flashing through the headlights. Elias was already calculating the drive back when he noticed a woman near the curb. She wore clothes meant for somewhere warmer and brighter than a wet Tacoma platform. One hand gripped a street sign. The other clutched a handbag against her chest. People moved around her. Nobody stopped. Elias slowed. His phone showed 8:46. 14 minutes. He could still make it. Then the woman took one uncertain step toward the street. Elias noticed the details automatically. Her balance was wrong. Her eyes weren't tracking the traffic, and when a car passed, she startled as though she hadn't realized how close it was. He tightened his hands around the steering wheel. Micah was waiting. The blue timer would already be sitting on the kitchen table. Elias drove another 20 yards. Then he looked in the rearview mirror. The woman tried to stand straight. For half a second, she managed it. Then her heel slipped from the curb. Headlights swept across the wet pavement. Elias hit the brakes, threw the truck into park, and ran. Ma'am! She turned too late. Elias reached her just as she stumbled toward the lane, catching her by the forearm and pulling her back onto the sidewalk. The woman stared at him, breathing hard. Up close, Elias could smell alcohol. But what caught his attention wasn't how much she had been drinking. It was the fear in her eyes. She looked past him toward the station entrance as if she expected someone to come through it. Are you hurt? She shook her head. Do you need me to call somebody? Her fingers suddenly tightened around his sleeve. No. Elias waited. She swallowed. Then, much more urgently, she whispered, Please don't call my family. Elias loosened his grip on her arm as soon as she was steady. All right, he said, but you can't stand this close to traffic. The woman nodded, though her eyes were still fixed on the station entrance. Elias guided her toward a bench beneath the shelter without touching her again. Rain tapped against the plastic roof, while trains hummed somewhere beyond the intersection. My name's Elias. What's yours? A pause. Natalie. Okay, Natalie. Do you need an ambulance? No. Police? Her answer came faster. No. Uber? She gave a tired laugh that nearly became a sob. No Uber. Elias checked his phone. 8:51. 9 minutes until the promise he'd made Micah. He could call a cab, make sure Natalie got inside, and leave. But when he looked at her, he saw something alcohol alone didn't explain. Her hands shook around the strap of her bag. Every time footsteps approached, her shoulders stiffened. Is someone following you? No. It was the kind of no that didn't settle anything. Elias crouched far enough away to give her space. Then give me one person I can call. Natalie pressed both palms against her face. Please don't call my brother. He'll think I failed again. The words hung between them. Failed again. Elias didn't ask what they meant. His phone buzzed. The neighbor watching Micah. Elias stared at the screen, then at Natalie. For one uncomfortable second, resentment touched him. Not at her exactly, at the timing, at another problem landing in his hands when he was already carrying more than he admitted. Then he thought of Micah 8 years from now. 18, 28. Maybe alone somewhere. Maybe scared. Maybe needing one stranger to stay 5 minutes longer than was convenient. Elias answered the call. Hey, I need a little more time. He listened, thanked his neighbor, then texted Micah. Running late. I love you. I owe you 10. When Elias looked up, Natalie was watching him. You have a kid? A son. And you're missing something because of me. I made the decision, not you. Her eyes dropped. After a moment, Elias stood. Here's what I can do. You give me an address. I'll get you there. I won't call your family. I won't ask questions you don't want to answer. Natalie studied his face as though searching for the price hidden behind the offer. There wasn't one. Finally, she whispered an address in Tacoma's north end. 20 minutes later, Elias's truck stopped beneath tall, dripping maples on a quiet residential street. Natalie insisted on walking from the curb herself. Elias stayed several steps behind as she climbed toward the porch. Then her handbag slipped from her shoulder. It struck the wet boards and opened. A wallet slid out, keys, a lipstick, and a thick folder. Elias bent automatically to keep the papers from blowing into the rain. Then he froze. Printed across the top page was a logo he saw every working day. Harbor Bridge Recovery Center. Natalie snatched the folder from his hands. For the first time that night, the fear in her face changed. Now she wasn't afraid of whoever might appear behind them. She was afraid of what Elias had just seen. Elias slowly raised both hands. I didn't read it. Natalie hugged the folder against her chest. Rainwater glistened in her hair. And for a moment, she seemed almost sober. You work there? Facilities? At Harbor Bridge? Yeah. She looked away. That explained something, Elias thought, but not nearly enough. Natalie searched through her bag again, then checked her coat pockets. Once. Twice. My keys. They fell out with everything else. I don't have the house key. Elias glanced toward his truck, then at the dark windows behind her. I can call a locksmith. Natalie leaned against the porch railing. You've already done enough. Probably. That earned the smallest smile. Elias found a 24-hour locksmith and gave the address. 30 minutes. So they waited beneath the porch light while rain whispered through the trees. Natalie sat on the top step. Elias remained near the railing, leaving space between them. He didn't invite her into his truck. He didn't reach for her bag, and he never asked what was inside the Harbor Bridge folder. After several quiet minutes, Natalie looked up. You're not curious? About what? She tapped the folder. That. Sure, I'm curious. Then why haven't you asked? Elias rubbed rain from his sleeve. Helping somebody get home doesn't give me permission to walk through the rest of their life. Natalie stared at him. A car passed slowly, tires hissing over wet pavement. You know what people do when they see someone like me tonight? She asked. Elias said nothing. They decide that's the whole person. Her voice was quieter now. One bad night becomes your name. One mistake becomes your biography. You're having a bad night, Elias said. That's all I know. She gave a bitter little laugh. You make it sound simple. Simple isn't the same as easy. Headlights finally swept across the porch. The locksmith climbed out with a tool case, verified Natalie's identification, and went to work. By then, her speech was clearer and her hands had stopped shaking. When the lock clicked open, Natalie stood in the doorway but didn't go inside. "What's your full name?" Elias hesitated. "Elias Carter." She repeated it softly, as if storing it somewhere. He nodded toward the warm darkness beyond the door. "Drink some water. Get some sleep. You really aren't going to ask?" "No." Elias turned and walked down the steps. Behind him, Natalie called his name. He stopped beneath the rain. "Elias." Her voice had changed. No bitterness now. No drunken humor. "If my brother asks about tonight?" Elias turned. Natalie held the Harbor Bridge folder against her chest. "Tell him exactly what you saw." She paused. "Not what he wants to hear." Those words stayed with Elias all the way back to South Tacoma. By the time he pulled in front of the duplex, the rain had softened to a mist. The dashboard clock read 9:47. He had missed 10-minute time by nearly 2 hours. Inside, the living room lamp was still on. Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who watched Micah when Elias worked late, rose quietly from the armchair and pointed toward the sofa. "He tried to wait for you." Micah was curled beneath an old Seahawks blanket, one sock missing, his cheek pressed against a throw pillow. On the coffee table sat the blue kitchen timer. 10. Still untouched. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed his shoulder before leaving. Elias carried Micah to bed, but the boy stirred halfway down the hall. "Dad, I'm here. You're late." "I know." The disappointment in those 2 words hurt more than anger would have. Elias sat beside him. "There was a woman who needed help. I should have called sooner. I promised you I'd be home, and—" "Was she hurt?" "No." "Was she scared?" Elias thought about Natalie looking over her shoulder at the station. "Yeah, I think she was." Micah rubbed his eyes. "Did she have anybody?" The question stopped him. "She got home safe." "That isn't what I asked." Elias looked at his 8-year-old son and almost smiled. Danielle used to do the same thing, quietly remove every place he could hide inside an answer. "No," Elias admitted. "She was alone." Micah climbed out of bed and padded toward the living room. "Buddy, what are you doing?" He picked up the blue timer and brought it back. That little plastic timer had once belonged to Danielle. After she died, Elias had turned it into a rule. 10 minutes every evening, when bills, school problems, repair calls, and everything else stayed outside their kitchen. Micah placed it between them. "Then she needed your 10 minutes more than me." Elias looked down. He spent so much time worrying that Micah would remember what he couldn't provide that he sometimes forgot to notice what the boy had already learned. "Doesn't mean I should break promises." "You didn't break it." Micah turned the dial. "You just gave it away." The timer began ticking. Elias pulled his son close, and for 10 quiet minutes, he allowed himself to stop fixing things. Monday morning, that same sentence came back to him inside Harbor Bridge. "Where did you find her?" Elias stood across from Raymond Pierce, looking again at the frozen security image of Natalie on the phone. Only now, he understood why Raymond's face had changed. Natalie wasn't simply the frightened woman Elias had helped home. She was Raymond Pierce's sister. And Raymond hadn't asked whether Elias had harmed her, embarrassed her, or taken advantage of her condition. He had asked what Natalie told him. Elias met his boss's eyes. "Why don't you ask me what happened?" Raymond went still. For the first time that morning, Elias saw something beneath the man's authority. Not anger. Fear. Raymond slowly locked his phone and placed it face down. "Because," he said, "you need to understand who my sister used to be at Harbor Bridge." Elias remained standing. Raymond moved toward the narrow window overlooking the courtyard. Below them, staff members crossed between buildings beneath gray Tacoma skies. "Natalie wasn't just connected to this place," Raymond said. "She was our clinical program director." Elias said nothing. She helped build some of our strongest resident programs. 2 years ago, she left after a disagreement with me. What kind of disagreement? Raymond's jaw tightened. The kind families shouldn't drag employees into. That answer told Elias more than Raymond intended. Raymond turned back. My sister has struggled with alcohol. There were missed meetings, broken promises, times when I didn't know whether I was talking to Natalie or to whatever pain she was trying to drown. Elias thought of the woman beneath the porch light, saying one bad night could become a person's entire biography. Raymond continued carefully. If she told you things about Harbor Bridge, understand that she remembers those years differently than I do. She didn't tell me anything about Harbor Bridge. Raymond studied him. But you saw something. Elias remembered the folder. I saw a woman who needed to get home safely. And that's what happened. Raymond exhaled. You're protecting her. No, sir, I'm respecting her. A knock interrupted them. Gavin Shaw stepped inside, carrying a clipboard. Harbor Bridge's operations director always looked as if he'd been dressed for a meeting before sunrise. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, not a wrinkle anywhere. Raymond, can I borrow Elias? Minutes later, Gavin led him into the maintenance conference room. A single sheet of paper waited on the table. Routine incident statement, Gavin said. Elias read it. The report said he had encountered an impaired individual associated with Harbor Bridge, provided transportation assistance, observed no relevant documents or statements, and had no information affecting the organization. Elias read the last sentence twice. I never said that. It keeps a private family matter private. You wrote what I didn't see and what I don't know, because you don't know anything relevant. Elias slid the paper back. Then write that I helped her home. Leave the rest out. Gavin's expression cooled. We have donors visiting this week. The Veterans Housing Inspection is coming up. Raymond doesn't need gossip about his sister becoming another distraction. This isn't gossip. Exactly. So sign it and we move on. Elias looked at the signature line. He thought about Natalie clutching that folder. Tell him exactly what you saw, not what he wants to hear. I'll sign an accurate statement. This is accurate enough. Not with my name under it. Silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Gavin picked up the paper and aligned its edges against the table with 2 sharp taps. Then he leaned closer. Elias, you're good at your job. Don't turn one Saturday night into something bigger than it needs to be. Elias held his gaze. Gavin lowered his voice. Protecting a place like Harbor Bridge sometimes means knowing what not to put in writing. Elias left the paper unsigned. By Tuesday afternoon, Gavin had stopped calling him Elias. Now it was Carter. Carter, reset the West Wing alarms. Carter, clear the lock faults before inspection. Small things, professional enough to deny, sharp enough to notice. Elias noticed everything. That was why the new Veterans Housing Wing bothered him. 24 apartments were scheduled to open Monday, but the building had developed problems nobody could explain. Smoke detectors triggered without smoke. Electronic locks reset themselves. Hallway lights blinked for half a second, usually late in the afternoon. The contractor blamed sensitive equipment. Gavin blamed unfinished calibration. Reset the panels, Gavin ordered. Inspection is Friday. Elias stood beside the electrical cabinet, listening to its low mechanical hum. What caused the faults? Does it matter if the reset clears them? It matters if they come back. Gavin gave him a tired look. Not every blinking light is a crisis. Elias didn't argue. He opened his maintenance log. The alarm fault had occurred at 4:12. The lock reset at 4:12. The hallway voltage drop. 4:12. 3 separate systems. Same minute. That evening, after Micah finished his homework, Elias spread electrical records across the kitchen table. The blue timer sat nearby, untouched. You working again? Micah asked. Just 10 minutes. Micah raised one eyebrow. Elias smiled faintly. Okay. Maybe 20. He compared power logs, renovation diagrams, equipment manuals, and old service reports. Most people saw pages of numbers. Elias saw rhythm. The short voltage drops had begun after the housing wing was tied into Harbor Bridge's upgraded backup power system. He pulled the renovation records. 2 years earlier. Same period Raymond said Natalie had left. Elias leaned back. Coincidence didn't bother him. Patterns did. The next morning, he went into the basement archive and found 3 boxes labeled Facilities, 2019-2024. Dust coated his sleeves as he searched. Then he found the procurement file. The original design called for 1 transfer system. A later change order substituted a cheaper unit. The approval carried Gavin Shaw's signature. Elias felt his stomach tighten. Saving money wasn't automatically wrongdoing. Equipment substitutions happened every day. Then he noticed a photocopied engineering memo clipped behind the approval. 1 paragraph had been crossed through in black ink. The remaining words warned that reducing backup capacity without additional testing could affect life safety and controlled access systems during transfer events. Elias turned the page. Another note had been attached behind it. Not from an electrician. Not from a contractor. A clinical administrator had requested that the change be reviewed because emergency access failures could create additional risk for residents in crisis. At the bottom was a name, Natalie Pierce. Elias stared at it. The woman he'd found frightened beside the light rail hadn't merely carried Harbor Bridge papers 2 nights ago. She had been warning this place years earlier, and someone had filed that warning away. Elias heard from Natalie the next afternoon. She was waiting near the employee entrance when his shift ended, standing beneath the awning as rain darkened the parking lot. No evening dress, no unsteady steps. She wore jeans, a gray coat, and carried a thick folder marked with red tabs. "I need 5 minutes." Elias looked at the folder. "You came here Saturday because of this." Natalie nodded. They crossed to a small coffee shop across the street. She ordered tea and wrapped both hands around the paper cup without drinking. "I used to run Harbor Bridge's clinical programs," she said. "You know that now." "Raymond told me." "Did he tell you why I left?" "He called it a disagreement." A tired smile crossed her face. "That sounds like Raymond." Natalie opened the folder. Charts, dates, resident numbers, hospital readmissions. 2 years earlier, Harbor Bridge had reduced its post-discharge follow-up program. Fewer home visits, fewer check-in calls, less staff time after residents left structured care. Natalie had objected. "People looked stable when they walked out our doors," she said. "Then some of them disappeared from follow-up until they were back in an emergency room." "Did Raymond know?" "I tried to tell him." "That's not what I asked." Natalie looked down. "Yes, he knew." Her voice softened. "But by then, I was drinking more, missing meetings, showing up angry, sometimes not showing up at all. Every time I gave him another reason not to trust me, it became easier for him to stop hearing the parts where I was right." Elias understood that kind of tragedy. Not one villain. Just truth arriving through a damaged messenger. "Saturday night," Natalie continued, "I had new data. I was going to take it to Raymond." "But you didn't." "I sat outside his house for 20 minutes. She swallowed. "Then I got scared. I drank because I thought it would make me brave enough to knock." "It didn't." "No." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "It made me run." That was who she had been looking for behind her at the station, Elias realized. Not a stranger chasing her. Her brother. Her past. The conversation she couldn't face. Natalie pushed the folder toward him. "You work there. You saw me that night. If you tell Raymond I wasn't imagining this—" Elias placed one hand on the folder, but pushed it gently back. "No." Natalie's face hardened. "You haven't even looked." "I don't need to." "You found my old warning, didn't you?" Elias went still. She had guessed from his expression. "So you know." "I know enough to know this isn't mine to fight for you." Her chair scraped softly as she leaned back. "I thought you believed me. I believe you deserve to be heard. That's different from using me as proof that your brother should believe you." Natalie's eyes dropped. Elias stood, then paused beside the table. "If you want to walk into Raymond's office again, you should." "I don't know if I can." "I won't speak for you." She looked up. "But I'll sit outside the door," Elias said, "so you don't have to walk in there alone." The next morning, Elias returned to the Veterans Housing Wing before sunrise. The corridors were empty, the polished floors reflecting pale emergency lights. 24 apartment doors waited for people who had already waited too long for somewhere safe to sleep. Elias opened the electrical room and connected his meter. He recreated the transfer sequence. The lights flickered. A relay clicked. Then one electronic lock stayed red 3 seconds longer than it should have. Elias repeated the test. Same result. By noon, he had the equipment specifications spread across his workbench. The replacement transfer unit approved during the renovation could handle normal operation. But under a real outage, when elevators, emergency lighting, alarms, ventilation, and controlled access systems demanded power almost together, the margin became dangerously thin. Elias called the contractor. Was this unit tested under full emergency load? A pause. Not with the current configuration. That answer was enough. He pulled the old change orders again. Gavin's signature, the cheaper equipment, Natalie's warning. But now Elias noticed something else. The date. It matched the same cost reduction period Natalie had described at the coffee shop, the months when Harbor Bridge reduced post-discharge follow-up. One decision affected wires, another affected people. Both had been justified the same way. Efficiency. Elias sat back slowly. There was no secret mastermind hiding behind Harbor Bridge. That would have been easier. Instead, good people had accepted one small compromise after another. A cheaper component here, fewer follow-up hours there. A warning postponed because the budget was tight. A concern dismissed because the person raising it had become difficult to trust. Each decision looked survivable by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. Harbor Bridge had started measuring what things cost before asking what happened when they failed. At 3 o'clock, Gavin entered the electrical room. "Inspection team comes tomorrow. We're opening Monday." "Not with this system." Gavin stared at him. "Excuse me?" Elias showed him the load calculations. The transfer unit is undersized for the current configuration. During a full outage, some control doors could fail to release properly. Could. Yes. Has it happened? Not during a real emergency. Then you're asking me to delay housing for 24 veterans because of a scenario. I'm asking you to test the scenario before 24 people sleep here. Gavin's jaw tightened. We reset the faults. We pass inspection. We open. He placed the acceptance form on Elias's workbench. Sign it. Elias looked through the open doorway. Beyond it were clean rooms, fresh mattresses, folded blankets, empty closets. Real people needed those rooms. He knew that, which made the decision harder. Elias picked up the form. For a moment, Gavin relaxed. Then Elias placed it back on the workbench. Unsigned. I won't certify a system I don't believe is safe. Gavin's expression changed. You understand what happens if this building doesn't open Monday? Elias did. For the first time, doing the right thing wasn't going to protect everyone from pain. It was going to cause some of it. Gavin folded his arms. 24 veterans, Elias. He pointed toward the empty hallway. Some are in motels. Some are sleeping on relatives' couches. One man's been living out of his truck for 3 weeks. Monday is the date they've been given. I know. Do you? Gavin tapped the unsigned form. because from where I'm standing, you're protecting people from a problem that might happen by guaranteeing a problem that will." The words followed Elias home. That night, rain tapped softly against the kitchen window while Micah worked on a spelling sheet. Elias sat across from him with the acceptance form beside his coffee. He pictured 24 empty beds, 24 people hearing, "Not yet." Again, the blue timer sat between father and son. For once, Elias didn't turn it. Micah noticed. "Bad day?" Elias gave a tired smile. "Complicated day." He tried to leave it there. That was his habit. Protect Micah from bills, fear, uncertainty. Carry the heavy things alone. But Micah waited. Finally, Elias said, "There are people supposed to move into new apartments Monday. I found something that might not be safe. So fix it." "I want to." "But fixing it could mean they have to wait longer." Micah frowned. "So either way, somebody gets hurt?" The simplicity of the question caught Elias off guard. "Yeah." "What happens if you say it's safe and you're wrong?" Elias looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Something much worse could happen." Micah thought for a moment. "Then maybe doing the right thing doesn't mean nobody gets hurt." Elias looked back at him. "Maybe it means you don't choose the hurt you can't fix." The room went quiet. Elias had spent years trying to teach Micah how to become a good man. Some nights, the lesson traveled the other direction. Later, Elias opened his laptop. His first instinct was to keep working alone, to gather more proof, make the argument perfect, carry the responsibility until nobody else could question it. Then he remembered Micah asking him something weeks earlier when Elias refused help repairing their leaking porch. "Why don't you let people help if they're worried too?" Elias began attaching files, voltage logs, transfer unit specifications, fault histories, change orders, his load calculations. He sent everything to Harbor Bridge's safety team, the independent electrical contractor, and Raymond Pierce. No private notebook, no quiet warning that could disappear into another filing cabinet. By morning, Raymond had called an emergency meeting. At 8:17, Elias's phone rang. "Conference room, 10 o'clock, Raymond said. "Is Gavin coming?" "Yes." A pause followed. Then Raymond said something Elias had not expected. "Bring Natalie too." Elias looked through the maintenance room window toward the veterans wing. For 2 years, Natalie had been trying to make her brother hear one warning. For 2 days, Elias had been trying to make Harbor Bridge hear another. Now both warnings were finally going into the same room. At 10 o'clock, Natalie entered the conference room carrying the same red-tabbed folder Elias had seen at the coffee shop. Raymond looked at her. Natalie looked back. Neither spoke. Elias connected his laptop to the wall screen. He kept his presentation simple. Fault times, voltage drops, equipment specifications, load calculations. "The transfer unit works under normal conditions," Elias said. "The problem appears when emergency systems demand power at nearly the same time." Gavin leaned forward. "Appears?" Elias nodded. "Yes, that's why I refused certification. You're delaying housing based on a theoretical event." Elias changed the screen to a floor plan showing the controlled access doors. "The people sleeping in those rooms aren't hypothetical." Silence. Then Natalie opened her folder. Her evidence wasn't about electricity. It was about people. She showed readmission rates, missed follow-ups, crisis calls, and gaps that appeared after Harbor Bridge reduced post-discharge support. Different data, same pattern. "We kept calling it efficiency," Natalie said. "But every cut moved risk somewhere we didn't have to look at it immediately." Raymond's face tightened. "I heard these arguments 2 years ago." "No," Natalie replied quietly. "You heard them from me 2 years ago. That's not the same thing." Raymond looked down. Natalie's hands trembled, but she kept them on the table. "I was drinking. I missed meetings. I broke promises. There were days you had every reason to be angry with me." Her voice cracked. But being unreliable about some things didn't make me wrong about everything. Raymond closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, the authority was gone from his voice. I know. Natalie stared at him. Raymond folded his hands. I made your addiction the filter for everything you said. Once I stopped trusting you, I stopped separating the warnings that were valid from the behavior that frightened me. Natalie's eyes filled. And I made it harder every time I disappeared, she said. No embrace followed. No easy forgiveness. Just two siblings sitting across from each other without using the past as a weapon. Gavin broke the silence. We're losing sight of Monday. A delay has consequences. It does, Elias said. So does opening. Gavin shook his head. Again, you're treating a possible failure like a confirmed defect. Raymond reached for a folder beside his chair. It's confirmed. Everyone turned. I ordered an independent load test after Elias refused to sign the acceptance form. He slid the report across the table. The results came in this morning. Elias read the first page. Under simulated emergency load, voltage instability had disrupted the controlled access system exactly as his pattern predicted. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Raymond turned to Gavin. I also reviewed the incident statement you asked Elias to sign. Gavin's face changed. Raymond did not raise his voice. We'll discuss that separately. He looked at Natalie, then Elias. We're not opening Monday. Natalie released a breath that sounded as though she'd been holding it for 2 years. Raymond stood. And tomorrow, we start fixing more than the electrical system. Harbor Bridge did not open the Veterans Wing that Monday. Instead, electricians replaced the undersized transfer equipment and tested every emergency circuit under full load. The 24 veterans received temporary housing extensions while the work continued. Raymond made other changes too. Harbor Bridge restored a pilot version of the post-discharge follow-up program Natalie had fought for. A new safety and resident systems team brought maintenance staff, nurses, counselors, and social workers to the same table before major decisions were approved. Gavin lost his authority to approve safety work while his decisions were reviewed. He was also required to submit a written acknowledgement that he had pressured Elias to sign an incident report containing statements Elias had never made. It wasn't revenge, it was accountability. Natalie wasn't offered her old job back. She didn't ask for it. Instead, she entered a recovery program and told Raymond she wanted to earn stability before asking anyone else to trust her with responsibility again. Harbor Bridge later reserved a place for her on its resident advisory group, if and when she was ready. For the first time, Raymond didn't try to decide that moment for her. Elias received his own offer. Facility Safety Coordinator, Raymond said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. You'd have authority to stop unsafe work without going through operations. Elias read the salary, then the responsibilities, then the schedule. I want it, Raymond smiled. But 2 evenings a week on call, that's not going to work. Raymond seemed surprised. Months earlier, Elias would have swallowed the problem and figured out how to carry it. Not anymore. I have an 8-year-old son, Elias said. If you want me responsible for protecting people here, I need a schedule that lets me protect what's important at home too. Raymond considered that, then nodded. Let's rewrite it. 3 months later, the Veterans Wing finally opened. No ribbon-cutting miracle erased the delay. No speech made the past disappear. But 24 doors opened safely. Elias stayed long enough to watch the first residents carry boxes inside. Then he checked his watch. 6:32, and went home. Rain followed him through Tacoma. When Elias opened the duplex door, Micah was already sitting at the kitchen table. The blue timer waited between 2 plates. Beside it was an envelope. Natalie sent that, Micah said. Elias opened the card. There was only one sentence. Thank you for lending me your dad's 10 minutes. Elias read it twice. Micah reached for the timer. You know, Elias said, sitting down. Technically, she had more than 10. Micah gave him the look Danielle used to give whenever he tried to argue with something that didn't need fixing. "This is important." Elias smiled. "Yeah, it is." Micah turned the dial to 10 beats. The ticking began. Outside, Tacoma disappeared behind a soft curtain of rain. Inside, there were no maintenance reports on the table, no budgets, no emergency calls, no problems Elias needed to solve alone, just a father and his son. 9:59. 9:58. And for once, Elias didn't measure those minutes by what they cost him. He measured them by who received them. Sometimes kindness doesn't repair someone's life in one night. Sometimes it simply gets them somewhere safe enough to stand up again tomorrow. And sometimes the smallest piece of time we give away returns to us carrying something we never expected: the courage to listen, the strength to speak, and the wisdom to finally make time for what matters most. If this story touched you, leave a comment. When Micah turned that little blue timer back to 10 eggs, Elias finally understood something he had spent years missing. Time given to someone in need isn't always time taken away from the people you love. Sometimes, those 10 minutes come back carrying a lesson that changes the way you live. Elias never helped Natalie because he expected recognition, a better job, or even a thank you. He simply chose to show up when another human being needed him, proving that some of the most meaningful things we do may happen when nobody is watching and nobody knows our name. So today, if you notice someone struggling, give them one small thing you can afford: a few minutes, a patient ear, or simply the dignity of being heard. You don't have to solve their life. Sometimes you only need to do what Elias did and help them reach a place where they can take the next step themselves. Have you ever given a stranger a few minutes of your time and later realized those minutes mattered more than you expected? Tell me about it in the comments. And stay with us, because the next story begins with another ordinary choice. One that seems small at first until someone discovers just how much it was really worth.